speak. Is that better? Ah. Sorry, Kurt.
Yeah, no problem. I forgot we could be at Colac until the invite popped up 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Hola, Evelyn.
Hey, how's everybody doing? Good.
You just press the, yeah,
Like that? Okay.
right. Okay, so ad hoc. Yeah. Okay.
All right, everybody. Well, it's 5 o'clock. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Michelle, could I please have a roll call?
Sure, but I don't have my full list, so I'm just going to have to roll call who's here. Larson? Here. Bosco?
Here.
Galindo?
Here?
Hendrick?
Here.
Pena? Duran?
Here.
Duran?
Duran? Here.
And is that Acevedo? I can't tell.
That was actually you.
No. Oh, that's you. Okay, that's who we have present. I do know that Board Member Delgado said she would be a little late to the meeting.
Okay. So let's see. May I please have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
So move.
Second.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. And can I please have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from the last meeting?
So move.
Second.
And a second? Thank you. Is there any, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. So at this time, that brings us to the business and the action items, and that is the draft and the preliminary proposal to the Board of Education that Tony and Michelle put together. So do you want to bring that up? Has everybody had a chance to look at that? And maybe we can just kind of open it up to a discussion of that proposal.
So after last week's meeting, we had started to kind of put the recommendations that we've been working on into kind of priority areas, and then off of each priority build a specific recommendation. And so when Michelle and I met yesterday, we basically took that information from last week and tried to work it a little bit so that it was the priorities were clear, the recommendations connected to the priorities. And so I wonder, Evelyn, if we should just take a few minutes for folks to read through those, and then maybe go one at a time and to discuss any adjustments, additions, subtractions, modifications.
Did you want us to, I earlier looked at it and made comments, but do you think it's a good, for people to make comments on in the margins, or just to kind of just to discuss together? How would you like us to do that?
I think probably both, because I don't know if everybody's had access to the Google Doc to be able to do that. But maybe as we get to each section, I think it'd be good for you to, talk about the notes that you included for clarity for the other folks, and then just go section at a time to see if we could tighten these up.
Okay, do you want to start with like the background information and then
Sure.
have people kind of look at that?
Sure.
Okay. So,
Excuse me, I
you
just
know
want
what
to
you
make,
guys have?
can I just make a quick note that there were a couple recommendations that you had made, Evelyn, that were like typo type recommendations, and I just went ahead and accepted those. So those have been made and done.
Okay. Yep. Okay, so the background information we have here, the committee has been working for the last 4 months to determine through research, discussion, and best practices the top primary and secondary priorities, along with recommendations for mitigating the language barriers that exist between our Spanish-speaking families and the school district of Beloit. So here the one thing I said was, if we wanted to say specifically what we did, surveys, et cetera, bringing in students and HR professionals, or did we just want to, I don't know if we wanted to give more background about the types of research that we did, and if anybody else has anything that you think is important to include in the background information. Like one thing that we might kind of take as obvious, but as I'm reading it, we didn't really say what the barriers are, but we might want to just clarify any barriers that we've, I don't know if we want to clarify barriers that we've noted or problems that we've seen as part of the background, or just leave it as it's just, I'm just kind of brainstorming.
I like that idea, Evelyn. I think it would be purposeful to include what those barriers are, so they can understand more so what are the recommendations, where they're coming from.
I like both suggestions of the listing the things we did, and I would include like the bilingual liaisons in there too. And then Evelyn, what you said for the barriers, you had language and cultural. I think we should add language, cultural, and systemic, because I think we talked about systemic issues too.
Mm-hmm.
Carol, when you said systemic, are you referring to the education context?
Well, I'd say, yeah, I think, we talked about, like, when we were looking at how a lot of the folks who are people of color in the district, that in paraeducators we had, 46%, whereas in professional educators was like 15%. And to me, that's when you're talking systemic, how, people of color, of multicultural backgrounds may be represented, but not always in the highest levels. And that's, to me, systemic. It's not an intentional thing necessarily by people, but it happens as part of the system we've been in. Does that answer what you're asking, Tulio?
Yeah, thank you.
So maybe to address both things together, when we were talking about what particular barriers there are and what research we did, maybe what we could say is through something like through our surveys that we did with families, we discovered, or because we already kind of knew there were barriers, but we identified basically the idea that parents weren't, all the things that we found out from those surveys, that we weren't communicating well, or just, that some of the methods that we were using weren't exactly, they needed a more personal approach. I remember that was one of the things. And when we had the student, Jennifer, come in, I remember she kind of brought up the fact that the students were sometimes having to interpret for their younger siblings. I don't know, so maybe something like that we could include here about through the early research that we did, we identified particular problems that we wanted to address, and that would kind of hit both of those, identify the problems and also talk about the research that we did. And
So the barriers, I think, would be on that same document that we used to kind of prioritize. There were 10 barriers that we had included in that list that started with access to technology, use of technology, communication with families. That list, because this is essentially a board report. If we were going to do a presentation to the board that touched on the barriers, because it's kind of two different things, right? The recommendations is, just figuring out what our talking points to the board would be. So our task was to bring recommendations to the board, but we're trying to give some more background information about that. And typically in our board report, your background information is going to be fairly concise. But then as you go into a presentation, right, about your recommendations, you would probably have a slide about barriers. So you would have a slide about the research and methodology we use to kind of sift and winnow through these barriers to come to the recommendations. Right? So is that kind of, we would take the data from the barriers Google sheet that we used, indicate these were the 10 barriers that we identified through research, through interviews, through surveys, and then from those barriers, we, the research that we did, because we spent a couple of meetings, I think, looking through, different, documents and pieces of research to kind of get a little bit better idea of what those barriers might be, identified as within the research, and then come to the point of which we're trying to prioritize the data that we had internally at our level, and then making those into priorities and recommendations. So is the next part, are we, because I think we have to solidify the recommendations and then determine how we're going to present those to the board, right? Mm-hmm. So should we go to the recommendations and then, and then determine what, how we want to build the board presentation? Because right now this is only a draft of the recommendations, and we would probably, depending on this, when this would go to the board, which I think is in a couple of weeks, we would put the presentation together and then submit that along with this board report in preparation for a presentation to the board.
Yeah, that sounds good. We could even include the survey questions, you know, I don't know if that would be part of an appendix, but all of that would be interesting to see.
Okay.
Okay, then we can maybe move to the rationale. So it says here, the ad hoc committee developed 4 primary priorities to mitigate the language, cultural, and systemic barriers in the school district of Beloit, and several recommendations to support these priorities. The priorities and recommendations are, and the first one is build and maintain strong communication with Latinx families, translating and interpreting services for written and verbal communication at the building and district levels, and B, building level signage, audit and assurance that all signage is in English and Spanish across school district of Beloit facilities. So any discussion or ideas on these?
What do we want to say? Written, verbal, and video communication? Because we did talk about videos.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume that the verbal would be under that, because you want to keep it pretty general. Once you start adding like videos and things like that, it might pigeonhole us, you know, but keeping it pretty general. I could see an argument for saying video does include verbal, because you are, you know, unless written, verbal, and visual communication, I don't know.
I couldn't hear you. I don't know if anyone else, it could just be me, but I couldn't hear.
So I said that maybe rather than recommending modes of communication, video being one of them, I could see an argument for including video under verbal, or we could say written, verbal, and visual communication.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if we have to. And then with translating and interpreting services for written, verbal, and visual communication at the building and district levels, do we add the word expanding to it? Because we have some of this in place. It's just that we do need, you know, for it to be expanded.
Is this where the board docs comes in, like all of those documents, or are we leaving that to the side? Or I guess what I'm asking is if we want to be more specific about which things we're talking about translating, or if we're just talking maybe about services, you know, expanding the services and then. Maybe Maria, specifically, how I know that one of a goal for you was that we translate the board docs. I don't know how you feel, if it fits in here, if it's addressed enough, or if you or what you think about that.
Can you come back to me? I just got home. I'm setting up here.
I
will answer your question in just a few minutes.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
As I look at the one thing I notice is the thing about the word expanding is, I mean, if 10% of what we do is translate it and we go to 15, we expanded. But I think our point is we want in all ways of communication, right? We want everything translated. Would that be the case?
I would agree with that. I think that everything needs to be just like how Kurt said about, changing the mindset, that, it's real. Our Spanish community continues to grow. And I think we need to really start thinking and having the mindset of just dual language in general, regardless of, if students are in dual language or not. I mean, still we have like a huge population that needs all the information that we provide translated into their own language.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And it's very different because it's one thing to provide like additional services versus to consider it a fundamental part of our culture at a base. I think that's a key difference.
Yeah, so last night on our board meeting, we had a presentation about maps being provided. And the request was that for those maps, and more so for the ones that are being provided for the dual languages classes, like the social study classes that are in the dual language program, that those be translated and to have both English and Spanish because, there's we have kids that are English speaking, like their first language is English, and then we have other kids that their first language is Spanish. So in order to be equitable, we need to provide, the both languages. So if we could adopt, that rationale, to all the documents within the district, I think that would be great.
And I think what you're saying too, Maria, that to me, the thing I think I've heard throughout all this discussion is that you're saying that in all things we are dual language, in all things we are this mindset of, multicultural. So, if everything flows out of that, then all the other things below, naturally follow. So like in this one, we'd say maybe translating and interpreting services for all written, verbal, and visual communication, right? And that's what we're wanting to say. Like everything we do, it's bilingual or multilingual if necessary.
So I think I'm hearing, rather than expanding, that we're ensuring, translating, interpreting services for all written, verbal, and visual communication at the building and district levels.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'll read it again from Michelle. You ready?
And I think it's proper to just keep in mind that these are recommendations, and obviously there are going to be like steps and processes to get to that. So like the recommendations are our ultimate goal. So I mean, initially I know that it's unreal to think that they're going to be making that transition, completely like within a month. It's just something that we want to get eventually. So to start out, we can start out by, providing, making sure that we have, translators, or making sure that our documents are being translated. But eventually we want to get to that goal of just being dual language.
Okay.
Or multilingual.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So are we good on the language in 1A? Ensuring, translating, and interpreting services for all written, verbal, and visual communication at the building and district levels. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. It's pretty.
All right.
That's a good goal. Like Maria said, it's good to keep a goal and then know that we're going to be working toward that.
Sure. Okay, 1B, building level signage audit and assurance that all signage is in English and Spanish across school district employee facilities. So is that?
I think that's.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's another good goal, as far as building strong and maintaining strong communication. Mm-hmm.
In that communication, when it's coming to translation, we need to write, and I hope I can make myself understand, in a common Spanish language. What I mean is, At other time, I have seen that thing that is translated in one way, in some other school it's translated a different way. And then you see sometimes in other areas translation that they are not practically following, the right written, what you call techniques or methodology. So I think this is something also that we need to think. I don't know how we can do that if we had to have a centralized area where, we check, we edit a lot of that information or reading. But I see there are a lot of mistakes when it's translating into Spanish, sometimes grammatically.
I think that's a really good point, Julio, because, there could be, I've seen that also where sometimes, maybe just standardizing our, how we're going to address parents and families, whether it's with, the usted form or the to form and just having training around how we are going to present ourselves as a school district, our voice as a professional organization, but in Spanish. Maybe those discussions need to be had about what a standard kind of policy would be, because I think probably there's not a lot. It's just kind of you were trusting each individual to do it in their own way, and it's probably better than what we had before. But I think what we want to do is get to a level where it's a professional communication, and I think that needs, probably training around what our expectations are.
I can't read my handwriting. Is at the end of that of B, should we add something along the lines of, so it would read, building level signage audit and assurance that all signage is in English and Spanish across school district Beloit facilities using district approved language constructs?
Yeah, I think that would definitely be
Okay.
that would definitely help.
Then that just
Is that
says,
what do you think, Julio, or anybody?
Tony, what do you say after approved? What was the other?
using district approved language constructs.
Okay.
Would we want to use the word like common language constructs? I mean, I think that's the main point, right? So you're saying that the constructs they're common to in every building. Because you might approve one thing in one building and something different in the other. The point is that I think you're saying that it's a common construct.
But it's a district approved construct because that's going to, doesn't that kind of indicate that it's common, it's district approved? This isn't approved building to building, it's approved in the Department of Bilingual Programs or through.
Oh, okay.
So.
Okay. As long as that's clear, I think
right.
That's not the way I understood it when you said it at first.
Okay. So using district approved, did you say common, Kurt?
Right. Like it's a common construct that each building has the same, if this is the signage for the bathroom, it's a common, all the signs are in common. I mean, I don't know if I'm saying that exactly right either, but the way it's written, someone could read it that, the district approved this sign here and they approved this sign here, but the signs are different in each building, which is what Tulio didn't want. So just some way of making sure that it's clear that the signs are all a common construct. The language is a common construct. I don't know if that's the way to put it, if there's another way of saying it. That's just the way that came to mind when I saw that.
So are you saying, Kurt, that like all the signages should be the same? Like if it's a sign for the bathroom, it should be the same across the district?
Yeah, I think that's what Tulio was saying, and I think actually the way you just put the word same in there works best. Yeah, they're all the same. If you're saying office, it's all, they all say it the same way, rather than if there's an optional way, we want one that way.
I think keeping consistency and more so because I think that so we have different and I'm not even sure because we have students from like different places of the world that might speak like a kind of like a different language. So you would have to like really adopt to a specific, language model when you're talking, about Spanish, because and even like in Mexico, there's like different states that might say things differently. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Typically, our process for doing translating is if it can run or be processed through the triumvirate of Señor Tulio Duran, Señora Dorala Cederberg, y Señora Rosa Maria Lorson, entonces la ley. So that's typically the process that we use. If Tulio has a question about a translation, there's usually multiple people that have their eyes on it, so that we can try to make sure that according to our best internal linguistic resources, language resources, that this is our best interpretation of a particular word or phrase. And sometimes that's the trick when we're trying to turn an English phrase into a Spanish meaning. They really do collaborate pretty closely on making sure that they get to the point where they feel that this is the best translation. Is that?
I agree. That's fairly accurate. And given that all three of us have different home dialects, that helps too, because then that helps increase the commonality, and the standardization, which as much as possible.
Is there a way? Oh, I'm sorry. Is there a way of putting that, I guess, in the language? Because right now we understand that, and who we have on staff here right now, fit that. But I think that maybe that's an important thing to say there. And then once you have that, if it is the same, once your student starts in 4K or whatever, then when they go to intermediate or high school, the signage is the same, for everything. You're used to it because you saw it from where your child started.
Yeah, and it could be, I think that it would be productive for Tulio and Rosa Maria. And I didn't hear the third name that you said, but I trust all of you completely, and I am for sure. And so I think, but it would be nice to have you guys have a discussion around what you're editing, like what your criteria is, because if like Tulio, if you would say what edits you're making, because I think to know like what you're looking for and to have that in some kind of document, and just be very precise about, I don't know, somehow have conversations around that would be useful, because then everybody would have access to what criteria you're using. And for me, it's not so much that the signage is exactly correct, but that we're having the discussions around what is a good way to address families, what is the best way to, the discussions are the important part, and not so much that they're exactly the same, but it would be neat to see what your editing criteria is, and I think that's the important discussion to have. And maybe that would be professional development that the three of you could have together around and develop a voice together, that we could be behind and support as a district.
So how do we do with what Michelle has there as options? How do we, I guess, decide the phrase that to make sure we get both points across? If we say, consistent standard district approved language constructs, does that say it? Or, consistency to me says that we're doing the same thing in every building, but that idea of consulting all these, the different backgrounds, dialects to make sure it's standard, is the word standard good enough for saying that?
I think let me just clarify something. I think when it came to translation, you can pretty much with the basic idea, depending what you are translating. Okay, you can come with a basic idea that you don't have to play with slang or with a common expression from X country. But you can come with, some kind of interpretation that would be a basic one that everybody will understand. But the other part that was when I mentioned this is, the way to when I mentioned the edit part is because I have seen so many grammatical mistakes and sometimes Spanglish. And you can play with Spanglish if you're doing the right way. But sometimes when you have a Spanish and then the other part English and doesn't have any clarification, that can create some kind of confusion there with the language or with the understanding when people are reading.
Yeah, I think that's really important because if you Tulio, Rosa Maria, and whoever else is involved in the process of translating and interpreting for the district, if you have those conversations around, like in slang not being appropriate, or how you want to address whether it's the usted form, tu form, voceo, or whatever, then you could train, some way to train another person so that the voice, there's continuity. I think that would be important so that, it's not just with three individuals, but that it's how it was something that would be, just how the district does business with, and I think that would be important to have.
So how do we state that, I guess, is just my question, because you could take the way it's stated here and say consistent district approved, and somewhere down the line, we might not have any native Spanish speakers, and someone just throws in Google Translate and say, well, that fits what it says here. So how do we clearly say what you just said, Evelyn, in the text so that it's, that's clear? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I think that the consistent standard district approved language construct would do the trick for it. I really can't think of any other word that you can stick in there to, pretty much that would mean like everything that we're discussing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So just get rid of the same and put consistent and standard?
Yeah, that would be my suggestion.
So let me read it just so I'm tracking. So building level signage audit and assurance that all signage is in English and Spanish across SDB facilities using consistent, standard, district approved language constructs.
So we're not going to call all the bathrooms the water closets.
Right. Maybe something at the end here, the standard district approved language constructs that take into account the nuances of the languages, something that bridges the nuances of languages. Because like what Tulio was saying was that there is a common language, and we're not going to like say chompipe for Turkey because that's only used in like 2 countries, but looking for, I don't know, something like that.
This looks good.
Yeah.
I think keeping it the way that Tony read it encompasses that idea. For a couple reasons. One being that, it would be nice to have a lot of details about how we want to do this, but at the same time, I'm concerned about, narrowing our options, narrowing our ability to do things. So that's, so I don't know if Tony, if you read it again or.
Yeah. So 2 things. The other. So I'll read the whole statement, but I think we do want to be careful about nuance of languages, because that leaves open the idea that, well, that's not my nuance of how I would interpret it as, within my first language, whatever that might be. And again, we're trying to give the idea that we're using a district process without too much detail, because then when you get too much detail, it seems that we're, like Rosa Maria said, we're going to unintentionally create other constraints or maybe expectations. So so I'll read it again. So building level signage, audit, and assurance that all signage is in English and Spanish across school district Beloit facilities using consistent standard district approved language constructs that take into account the nuances of language.
So are you suggesting that we leave it just at the end, just to language constructs, and then take the rest of it off?
Yes, I think that's what Rosa Maria and I are recommending.
After constructs.
Yeah.
Anyone have any objections to that?
What was that, Maria?
Evelyn, do you have an objection to just leaving it in language constructs?
No, I don't have an objection to that. I just was trying to help
I completely understand what Tony and Rosa Maria are saying, and only because I work with policies like every day, and sometimes just getting, thinking about just making it white and black the gray area gives us more opportunity.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds good to me.
All right. And then the only other thing that just to go back to A for not even a whole second, but to add Spanish translating, interpreting services for all written, verbal, and visual communication at the building and district level. Just adding, we do try to serve other languages as much as we can using SWITs and other resources that are available, but we're talking primarily about Spanish language focus on for this particular language barrier process. So Spanish, I just added Spanish translating, interpreting services for all written, verbal, and visual. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I think we have like a reasonable, way to back that up, only because the higher percentage of families that we have in the community, and based on student attendance or student
enrollment
in school, it's higher than that. So if we were to be asked why are we only choosing Spanish, is because this is the fact. This is the data that we have to back that up.
Would we want to just put something in there saying if in 10 years from now a large Hmong community develops in Beloit, we'd want to have signages in Hmong. We just want to say the point is whatever large languages whatever languages are predominant, we're just trying to say we're inclusive of all those. And if it's not predominant, I don't know if there's a level, but I think that's the point we're saying there, right? It's the languages that are most predominant, we want signage for that, or in translation for that.
I think that adding something like that in there, again, would limit. I think that that's something that is mostly implied, and more if it was asked, reasoning too. We can always answer, with that reasoning, if we're asked.
Okay, that's a good point.
All right, are we ready to move to 2? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Strengthen our district-wide multilingual, multicultural mindset. And then, so that's the priority, and the recommendations are professional development that increases the cultural proficiency of staff working in a diverse, multilingual, and multicultural district/community. And Evelyn added a note about more specificity about the training, and I think that goes back to Maria's point about by leaving it broad, we're able to really year after year look at the training that we would need to meet that priority area of strengthening our district multilingual, multicultural mindset.
So let me ask a question. So who determines what kind of professional development you guys need, within the districts? Where does those determinations come from?
So typically what happens is based on, there are many ways to determine what professional development is provided. A big portion of it, as you saw last night with the K-5 literacy adoption, would come out of the resources and the instructional, practices that we'll need to develop with teachers over time to get better at, or to learn how to use a new resource, familiar with a new resource. Outside of that, that's the content kind of curricular focus. We also work as a team between the teaching, learning, and equity department, pupil services, to determine, have we had professional development around social emotional learning, around classroom management. We do lots of teacher surveys that give us information about what teachers would like to see. Every time we have a professional development day, Rochelle Elliott sends out a survey to staff getting feedback about the PD that was offered and then any additional PD that they would like to see. So that's another way that we get information about professional development that our staff would like to see. And then the last one is, as buildings develop their continuous improvement plans over the course of the year, and they develop their SMART goals and really dig in to their building level data and the needs of their building, they will develop or put together professional development plans that meet the needs of their continuous improvement process. So that not only are we looking at professional development from a district kind of larger perspective, but then also supporting buildings so that they can develop professional development plans around their specific local kind of strategic plan for their particular building, their continuous improvement plan for their particular building.
Okay, so in everything that you said, I was not able to catch how are your priorities set? Because to me, we need to have a champion out there that will present this as a priority, where we can have professional development on, like Evelyn suggested, on DACA, on equity, on language, on, culture, so from everything that you said, I did not hear how, this would come up. And I know that, equity, diversity, and, being cultural competent and all that, it's going to be like a huge part of our strategic plan, once that gets built. But I want to make sure that, because you guys are the voices within the district to actually bring all of this, in. And more so probably Tony and Rosa Maria, because you guys serve in a position of power where you have that power to present and make this thing's priority. I just want to put it out there that, us in this committee, we are the voices for, the needs of, that specific community, and hopefully that's being brought up.
Would it help if we added something having to do with, because I'm reflecting over on the work that we've done over the past school year, and one of the things that we've tried to do is embed equity into many of the different professional developments that we've offered. So it's not as explicit, and on the surface you might not see it as being equity focused, even though the intent and the professional development is organized and planned that way, so that it does include those pieces and becomes part of the teacher's practice. But if we want to have maybe something to, some wording about, interwoven or included in professional development, where, it as much as possible, whether it be curriculum, whether it be learning strategies, all those sorts of things, that it would include equity and cultural proficiency and a multilingual, multicultural focus, but also like explicit standalone, like you had said with DACA, for example. That might be a session that would be just about that and not something that's interwoven into something else. Did I make myself clear?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's important because there are particular issues that are issues primarily for Latino students that, like, for example, the legal status that, and language considerations and all sorts of things that I think would be beneficial for teachers and counselors specifically to be trained in so that we can meet the particular career and, college goals in a realistic way that some of our students have. And help them overcome challenges that other students don't have because of legal status.
Can I step back to the title, or is there more we want to say on what we just brought up? I'm just looking at the title where it says strengthen our district-wide multilingual, multicultural mindset. And the word strengthen again reminds me of when we were talking about increasing the Spanish translation that, it could be incremental, or, we went from 10 to 15. I think our discussion was always about prioritizing, like a district-wide multilingual, multicultural mindset, that this would be central. So strengthening could just be like, oh, lots of people are trying to strengthen, but do we want to see something like that, like prioritize a district-wide multilingual, multicultural mindset, that this is that centerpiece?
I think so. I think that's a good suggestion, Kurt. Because again, it's increasing is a little bit vague, where prioritizing gives us a more specific. It's a more specific recommendation.
And it almost sounds like when you say string, it's like it's a mindset. We want it to be the mindset.
I agree with that. I'd like that prioritizing instead of strengthening. It gives it more a sense of like urgency, like this is what we need right now.
And I mean, and actually, when you said that, one line I added, and I don't know where we put it in the whole document, but I like the line "with all due haste." That these are all things that while they will take time, they're pressing, they're important. They're not things that should be delayed if they can, if we can avoid it at all. Does that make sense? I don't know where you would put that, but I think that's the sense I've been hearing as we've talked.
Okay, so Michelle changed the priority to prioritize a district-wide multilingual, multicultural mindset. And then we were talking about professional development. So we're talking about 2A.
Yep.
And so
I do have one. Go ahead. Sorry, Tony.
No, go ahead, Kurt.
Well, there was one word I thought about in that one too. We have increase the cultural proficiency of staff. I think we also talked about increasing their language proficiency as part of that as well. Would we want to add that, the cultural and language proficiency of staff?
I don't know if we're at the point where we want to like make it a standard for teachers to be bilingual. I think I don't think we're at that point, Jeff.
Well, this one is one where we would leave increases. We're not saying everyone like we would with the other areas where all signs are. We just say we want to increase the cultural and language proficiency of staff. So this is not expecting of everybody, but it is trying to increase it.
Okay, I see what you're saying, Kurt.
And I brought this up in an earlier meeting, but to Kurt's point, I mean that could be as simple as like a colleague of mine passed around or emailed everybody at Beloit Memorial a pronunciation guide to students' names in Spanish, and even I thought, wow, that's really cool because to have your history teacher say your name correctly. I mean that would be a step in that direction. I think that or even just make an effort, I think is helpful.
Right. And again, I think we're getting pretty detailed on some of these ideas. And when we talk about increasing cultural proficiency, linguistic proficiency, regardless of language, is a part of that, because I think cultural proficiency, and we've talked about this with other groups of students in the school district Beloit, that ability to be culturally proficient is pretty wide, it's a fairly broad definition, and that allows us, to Maria's point, earlier, about over time developing, because it could be a certain focus around cultural proficiency or a couple of specific foci for cultural proficiency. One year we transition to a different focus, as we're continuing to build our proficiency, and we reach certain levels of proficiency, we don't stop, right? We continue even with language, and the idea that we'd, I just worry if we get too much detail in there, we again push ourselves into a situation where we're narrowing rather than leaving broad. I think we want to leave broad so that we can, over time, bring multiple approaches to develop cultural proficiency.
Well, I see that, Tony, but I also, I guess there's another side of it. And I'm thinking like, when I was involved in ministry, we talked about, we would say everyone is welcome. But then we had people from the LGBTQ community who contact us and said, if you don't say LGBTQ are welcome, we don't see you as including us, because churches will say that and they don't really do so. And what I'm wondering is if we can say cultural proficiency, but there might be lots of people who just think, well, I understand other cultures, but language is not something I see as included in that. So I guess I'm wondering on the other side, if we, because we have talked about ways of helping more staff to be able to speak Spanish as well as English, or, I'm wondering if broad might leave it out as well.
Well, but I think broad, because that's when we say that cultural proficiency is our target, we have lots of tools to get to that target. And again, if we say language and cultural proficiency, we're indicating that tells teachers that I'm going to have to take you see what I'm saying? I think that's too narrow and isn't going to convey the message that we're necessarily trying to convey.
Well, I'm willing to go wherever the group goes on that. I just want to, I guess, make sure, and however it comes across, that, we did talk about hoping that we would invite that, and I'd hate to have that left out if that's something that.
Right, and I agree 100%, Kurt, but we still have that option, right? Even though it's not stated as a part of our desire to increase cultural proficiency, that ability to support people in language development still lives within that.
Does anyone else have any comments about that?
Well, I do. I think I just want to make sure the accountability is there, because my concern would be that, if it's just culture, I don't know. That would be my concern, is I want to make sure that there is what we're proposing helps keep us accountable for all the things I think that we're hoping and expecting, the changes that we're hoping for. Because it's a careful space. Like, we don't want to lock ourselves into something, but at the same time, we do want a standard that will keep us accountable for, like for example, at this point, I don't know if we're because it does narrow it to say we want to focus on particular issues that impact the Latino community, which I think is why the ad hoc committee formed in the first place. But multicultural leaves it very broad, which allows us much more freedom. But at the same time, then there's not the accountability there that we're actually going to address issues like DACA or things that could have practical positive outcomes for our students. So I don't know. It's kind of a tough spot. I'm not sure what everybody else thinks.
I think about what our outcome, and this, making explicit what our outcome is with this one. So I think, as far as, do we want people to have more cultural proficiency? Do we want people to have, because I'm thinking of people across the district who have taken it upon themselves to, like our secretaries, to learn some basic Spanish so that when someone calls on the phone, they're not completely, not able to communicate until they can get somebody who, So there are examples like that, but, I can see both sides as far as keeping it broad, but at the same time, the accountability as far as the language piece is concerned. But how to communicate that in a way that you're not saying you will learn Spanish, but rather like the example that Evelyn had earlier about the pronunciation guide and the teachers pronouncing the students' names correctly. So I think of the words maybe linguistic capacity, which is still a little broad. It's not saying you are, it's increasing the cultural and language proficiency, because language proficiency, my mind automatically goes to learning a second language fully. But rather, linguistic capacity means that you, at least to me, that you are learning features of another language, you are learning pronunciation, you're learning basic phrases, something to help you make those bridges.
Well, can I add something that I'm thinking about all that we just said? This brought me back to when I think I shared last time. My roommate in college was from Copenhagen, and he spoke 8 languages. And in Europe, it was the norm that you would speak multiple languages. And I think in our title, we're saying we're prioritizing multilingual, multicultural mindset. I mean, we talk about this idea that maybe having this mindset down the road where we expect all our students to speak more than one language. That's the hope, that's a goal. I guess to me, that's why I was thinking of that in there. It's like, not just down the road that we know some phrases, that eventually we're getting to the point where, hey, we really prioritize that the norm should be speaking more than one language. Like it might be in other areas of the world where here we've been, the joke about what language they speak in heaven, it's English so the Americans can understand everybody else. I guess that's the thing I'm thinking of when I'm bringing that up, is like, I want people to professionalize the cultures, but this is a different mindset of, hey, we'd love everybody to speak multiple languages. That would be a norm, not an add-on.
So what do we think about the change that Michelle made there? Is that an and, or is that going to be left in parentheses?
I think it's good. Do you guys think it's specific enough and at the same time broad enough so that we're not kind of cornering ourselves into not being able to do the kind of work we want to do? I think it seems good.
I'm okay with it.
So to clarify, am I leaving it in parentheses, or am I saying cultural proficiency and linguistic capacity? Because I just put it in parentheses because it was mentioned, and I was waiting for an outcome of, are we adding it or not?
I think take out the parentheses, and my vote would be to take it out and add and, because cultural proficiency is more than linguistic capacity. So if we just had it as and, then they're two different focuses that we want to focus on.
Just thinking about what, Tony, what you were sharing, what if instead of and we said as well as, which kind of implies cultural proficiency is the priority, but linguistic capacity is also important? Would that kind of split the difference between what everybody's sharing?
Well, and
I think
I'm a little curious about what this, again, this is within the context of professional development. So when we're talking about professional development for our staff, and we're talking about linguistic capacity, what are we meaning when we include this? What kind of professional development are we going to offer our staff that increases linguistic capacity?
Well, I mean, what I would think that would be like a basic kind of professional development for everybody that people could benefit is even just understanding the levels of formality in Spanish. Understanding that our students might come in with like even just world languages, because that's what I teach. But a lot of times, a student will, textbooks, for example, present a standard form of Spanish, and a lot of things are marked wrong when a student uses an indigenous word from their home country. Like zacate instead of grama for grass. And also just, just kind of basic discussions around language, not necessarily, pronunciation could be part of it too, but I think just, it wouldn't have to be a specific language, teaching, phrases or language, but just talking about language structures that, that could be an initial thing. Like what kind, understanding that, just because you're from, Guatemala doesn't mean you're going to speak Spanish, but that you might have indigenous languages that are your first language, and just talking about those kinds of issues, I think would be an important first step. I don't know.
When I think of the professional development and things that I see that, that is a need in our district are things like, how do you capitalize on Latin root words? How do you, understanding that in Spanish that people don't necessarily use pronouns, or the students will get confused between using the words he and she because we don't use them in Spanish primarily. So having teachers understand that and be able to teach to those types of things, the way that Spanish works as opposed to English, being able to help the students bridge that, even though they might not necessarily know the language, how to speak it, but knowing the features of the language and then explicitly teaching the students the differences would be a big help. And that, to me, would be increasing their linguistic capacity, because they wouldn't have known that about Spanish had they not received a professional development like that.
And maybe we're looking at like just where each person is, you're offering like one step, like for the people that know Spanish background at all, just, knowing how to pronounce word names, like that Adam is not Adam, you're not, it's separate, I've lots of people like, we'll call a student whose name is Angel. It's like, and then they just accept it instead of saying, hey, how do we help people just take that, maybe that little step? How do you pronounce? But someone who's farther down the road, we might say, hey, we want to help. If you want to learn Spanish fluently, we would work on a program that helps you with, some type of immersion to help you become fluent. But wherever you're at, it's just one step further. So as a district, we've all taken a step. So that's a big step altogether, but it might just be, a little step for where you're at.
Yeah, and then beyond that, I think discussions around language and around how it's kind of hard to take apart language and culture ultimately, but I think I think those kinds of what we're discussing is important, and then we could also offer basic language Spanish for teachers, Spanish for teachers who don't speak Spanish at all, and that you could make in a short amount of time huge gains, because in a summer, just imagine, because the initial level, Spanish 1, I love teaching it because you go from zero to able to communicate, and it's a beautiful process, but and the same with teachers, to go from 0 to like, wow, you can like have a small, short conversation with your student, that would be amazing, you know, to offer something like that. And always coming back to the fact that we do have, you know, even just like coming at it from a business perspective, which is not always my primary, the mindset that I go about things with, but looking at who we're serving, it's very clear that we need to be able to, that Spanish, it's beneficial for our district to be able to have a level of proficiency that's expected, because we have so many. We have 33% Latino students and families, and maybe not all speak Spanish, but at the same time, even if 20%, I mean, that's just good business to be able to focus on that.
So are we saying that we would like to continue to incorporate that? Did that give you any ideas, Tony, as to how you can incorporate it into professional development?
I think we'll get there. I think, you know, going back to Evelyn's point about when you talk about providing professional development, developing, increasing staff's cultural proficiency, you cannot do that without talking about language, right? And I think that's where I'm personally getting kind of caught up in the wash a little bit with this, is because I see it as a part of the larger development of our cultural proficiency, and not specifically, I mean, linguistics and that linguistic capacity, exposure to some of the nuances that Rosemary is, that's all part of developing cultural proficiency. And so I you know, and again, from a professional development perspective, as we developed these PD modules to build this cultural capacity, it would be one that may talk about language nuance for students, and then the next one might be talking about another aspect of culture that may be, you know, tangential to language, but might bring in another aspect of, you know, cultural proficiency development. So I think there are lots of ways to approach it. I think it's fine to include it. It would be a part of, you know, linguistic capacity building as a part of cultural proficiency, professional development. It would be part of it anyways, but if we wanted to, you know, leave it where it's at, I think that's fine.
Okay, so just for the sake of time, and I'm not sure when we were planning to end the meeting, but we're like on number 2 right now, and we're not even completely over with 2, and we still have 2 more. I don't know, just putting it out there. You know, how much do we want to beat a dead horse? And I don't know, can we like stay within our structure agenda and maybe, you know, continue?
Yeah,
I mean,
so are we ready?
I think that sounds good.
Okay, so we're moving to B.
I like the way it's stated the way it is right now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good, and it's because it's, again, this stays broad enough where the stakeholders, it's a broad enough, you know, term where it's who has a stake in this. It could be parents, it could be community members, it could be really anybody.
Okay, do we
So
want
are we
to?
going on to 3? Sorry, go ahead.
I don't. Did we touch on B? On 2B?
Yep, I think that's what the one that we said we're fine with. So
What do you think about this one, Maria? Did you have thoughts on this? Ensure the strategic planning processes are inclusive of Latinx stakeholders?
I'm perfectly fine with that.
Yeah,
Same.
me too. Good.
Okay.
All right, maybe then let's move on to 3, if there's no other discussion around 2. So 3 says strategically diversify professional educator and administrative staff to reflect student demographics. So A is join recruitment agencies, attend recruitment fairs at historically Hispanic colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, etc.
Can I just say one broad thing? 'Cause we have 4 points here, A, B, C, and D. And even though it may not necessarily be the case, to me, the order sometimes implies the priority. And that being the case, I would suggest we do B, D, A, and C. And that, we were talking, we wanted to focus on those here, so, grow our own, which would be B. Get this right? No, wait, I'm sorry, B,
D.
that's the other way around.
Yep.
B, yeah, B, D.
A and C. Yep.
Yep. I think that would put the priority on local, it's and most important to the, at least, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Of course.
And when we say that we want to strategically diversify professional educators and staff to reflect student demographics, we want to say what types of demographics? Like, are we talking, again, is it linguistic, ethnic, racial demographics, economic demographics? Or, I mean, it's kind of obvious coming out of this particular committee, but I worry that it's not specific enough, and that again, we don't want to make it too specific, but the same kinds of.
I don't know. I kind of think this is where Tony, what you said does fit. That you just when you were starting to talk, Evelyn, you brought all these things came to mind because they were all implied in demographics.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then another thing, Kurt, you brought up a valid point a couple times in previous meetings about the level of staff, like that we might have a lot of staff that are in, part of our janitorial staff, but how do we want that to be a part of this, where we want to emphasize the level of staff, that we don't want just Latino janitors. Do we want to have that in here somewhere? Or,
well, that really is, isn't it? Because the title is professional educator administrative staff.
Okay.
We specified it there, and then down below we're saying the people who are on those other positions, we want to support them in rising to higher positions.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, I just think, other than the order, I thought this section was really well written to hit those issues.
So are there any other discussion points about A, B, C, or D under 3?
I guess this, now that I'm thinking back to what you said earlier, I'm wondering if this is the one where maybe in the title we would want to just put with all due haste, like this is this is long term, but we don't want to make it long term. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, do we want to put a timeline, like, I don't know, do we want to make it more specific time, or just?
Well, I don't know, that way, like, I don't know if we know exactly how long it would take to do that, but I mean, in terms of the priority, with, we want to do this it's so important that it needs to happen as quick as it can, but we don't know how quick it can happen. Does that make sense?
And I'm curious, I'm wondering about, I'm trying to remember if we had conversation about the idea that it's not necessarily about, like how fast it happens, but how strategically it happens. Because I think the other thing that we want to make sure that we're looking at is, if there's a building in the school district Beloit that has, and not that this is the case, an overabundance of one group, demographic of teacher, that is it strategic to approach that group and try to, move resources around to strategically diversify our teaching staff across the system. And that's the strategicness, I think, that we're looking for, versus, I agree 100%. I mean, this could be to realize the goal of diversification of our staff. That could be a 3, 5, 7, 10. I mean, I'm not sure what that timeline is, but we can insist or recommend that our staffing approaches are focused on diversification, now, right? That's something that we can do now as staff are hired, asking the district to look at those hiring practices to ensure that we are diversifying staff now. We may not reach our diversification goals, but we understand that process is in place, and we'll continue to develop that. Just as a thought.
And Tony, part of what I hear you, I'm sorry, I didn't know you.
No, I'm done.
Part of what I hear you saying, and I think we've said this is the central piece of all we've been talking about. Those other things are important because they're pressing issues now, but this is that long-term thing we're saying. This is what makes us what we intend to be, right? This piece here, right? I mean, is that not the case?
You mean number 3 as a whole?
As a whole, this is where we become the district we envision ourselves being, or always being in process of. But does that I mean, this is what I think all we've been talking about all along is this is where it's central, like where we reflect our community, in all these ways. This is what we really think is most important. But it's going to be long term. It's not going to happen next year where we might have signage next year, but this is the long term central piece of what we've been about.
Yeah.
I would agree. I would agree with you, Kurt, because I think what it comes down to with the 1 and 2, it's more difficult to get to those goals if you don't have the people. So being able to diversify the staff helps get to those other goals. So.
But I would also add that we can't wait to get to 2 until we have 3, right? I think that's an important, distinction to make as well.
Yeah, that's true.
And did we have these?
And they do fall.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kurt.
I said this. I think these were not in order of priority, but in order of the way they needed to happen. This, right? So look, you're right. If we get that mindset, now all this follows naturally from it.
Right.
And number 3 also in this is the fact that is the need for schools to collect data around where they are, like get a baseline. Because I think these are questions that potentially aren't even being asked, like where are we at now? I guess like we all said, we don't even know what is the potential of where we can be, but growth, and having some strategy to diversify, professional educators so that right now, let's say the number at Beloit Memorial is 10, and then what would be, a strategy around hiring that would maybe increase that number for next year and retain staff so that number keeps growing. I guess.
Well, so isn't that the next step then? Once the the board would go forward with this, and right? And Tony said that people like us would be the ones who would be a part of that anyways.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I didn't interrupt you with that. I'm sorry.
No, I think that's, I just think that this number 3 would prompt different questions at the building level, which I think is good. So that my point was I support 3 because I think we would be asking important questions, like where are we now? Where could we potentially be? And then when principals are approving hiring, then, those questions would be forefront, like deciding between candidates and keeping those goals in mind.
Have we thought of, and I know that we had a discussion before about it, some type of incentive for those bilingual staff? Is that something that has ever been in the mind of anyone when we think about hiring and retention?
I think that is part of a larger conversation that Dr. Keyser and Human Resources Operations are in the process of kind of analyzing, because I think that is a practice that is used in education, and it is definitely something that our district is aware of in terms of, sometimes if we do lose staff to other districts, that's occasionally part of the equation. And so I think that is definitely something that, long term is going to be looked at. But I don't, Rosemary and I are well aware of pay differentials that bilingually certified staff may be eligible for in other districts, so.
Okay, so what you're saying is that maybe not to include it here, but those are conversations that are actually happening?
They are conversations that are happening. And I think that's part of a larger kind of compensation approach, because the other thing is hard to fill positions are a thing, across education, and while it's bilingual programs or bilingual certified or bilingual staff, it's also, special education. I mean, there's a whole list of hard to fill positions, and I think that is our charge is, language barrier, right? So we have to look at what we think is in the best interest of addressing this particular concern or charge that the board gave us. So, and from that perspective, it would be primarily to incentivize the hiring and retention, or recruitment and retention of bilingually certified staff or bilingual staff. So I see the merit to it. I'm not sure.
I completely understand what you're saying, Tony. To the point that, it is a special skill that an individual is bringing. However, we do have other staff that have other special skills, like, special education, like you mentioned, and there's probably 1,000,001 of others that, would probably be included into that. I mean, I totally understand that. I don't know, I guess my only concern is that if we don't start advocating for it at any point, that's just going to be put, like it has been, put in the back burner, and it's just not happening. So sometimes we just do need to be vocal, even if it's denied, but at least they know that that's something that, you should really take into account. I can tell you from a professional standpoint, with my staff, I fought for Rock County to implement some kind of incentive because we do double the work.
Right.
I don't care what anyone says. We do double the work. When you have to be translating documents, when you have to be, thinking in both languages, at the same time, when you're providing any type of service, which in this case is education, to kids, it's not a skill that anyone else would actually has that can provide that. Like anyone else is not able to talk directly to a parent, in their own language and explain exactly how their child is doing and what are some of the steps that we can take to, get them to the place where they need to be. So, it's I don't know. I honestly, I take that just very, very seriously because regardless of what anyone else says, I think that special skill has a value to it. And I don't think we value it enough in the district. I don't think we even place any type of value. We require it for certain positions, but we do not give that value to it, as far as how it's being compensated.
So would that
Can
go
I bring
under?
up a thought on this?
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
So
go ahead first.
would that go under number 4? Then add a B, either create an incentive or incentivize bilingual certification. Because the first one is that we are supporting teachers with, people who are receiving their bilingual licensure. So maybe adding that.
I would agree that if we're going to add something like that, it probably goes better with 4 than with 3.
Well, I was actually thinking of 3, but only because when I look at D is really about retention, but it sounds like, the focus is the intermediate model. And these are both discussions on retention, right? That are we paying people for this level that's maybe we're losing retention? So should retention be a topic that goes in one of those 2 places and includes both those as issues on retention?
So, so going down to 4, should that be increase, and then we'd say maintain bilingual certification support, but should that be rephrased to say something about retain?
I think retain would make more sense.
Okay. And do we say, so would it be increase, maintain bilingual ESL certification support to retain district staff, district bilingual staff?
Yeah, Kurt, you had brought up 3D instead. I don't know, are you okay with that? With being part of 4?
I think it could go either place. That's just
Well,
what I had been thinking, what I was going to bring up, and I think it could go either way.
And then I was
Okay.
wondering about moving 3D down to 4. Would that be, because that's more retention focused?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that would be a good idea to move D to 4 and then include, another one, talking about incentive and, it would make it more clear that number 4 is about retention.
Yeah, I think that fits best too.
Yeah, and I think, Michelle, Tony mentioned support to retain bilingual district staff. There we go.
So how do we say that because the other thing that we talk about with bilingual certification, is it just bilingual certification or is it additional language proficiency?
Well, the bilingual certification requires the bilingual proficiency at advanced low?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what it is? So, and it's overlaps the ESL certification except for 2 courses, one being, well, bilingual methods and
I'm
then
having
the other
a
one.
really hard time hearing you, Rosa Maria. I don't know if any others are having the same issue.
Yeah.
Sorry, so the bilingual certification, the add-on supplemental license includes the requirement for language proficiency. So if you have a staff member who has a bilingual certification, a more recent one, because the ones from long, long ago did not require such a high level, but the more recent ones especially, we'd have to find out when the licensing changed a little bit, but that does require language proficiency. And the ESL license and the bilingual license overlap, except for the 2 courses, the one being bilingual methods and the other one being culture, and then the additional language proficiency. So that's, so I don't know that we would necessarily need to assess someone's language proficiency in the district if they have that more recent bilingual.
However, not
So
all.
are you saying that in order to like for instance, if you were to plan out a incentive for being bilingual, they would have to have an actual certification in order to qualify for that incentive?
That's how I've seen it done in other districts. However, there is a
Okay.
there is a question though, because many of our Spanish-speaking teachers, not only in our district, but because at the state level they require the Foundations of Reading test, and that one you pretty much have to have a reading specialist license to pass it because it's very difficult and it's all in English. So many of our teachers do have, it is a challenge for them to pass that test. So that's the other thing to consider is, do we have an either or situation, which then would help us with our teachers who are bilingual, who are Spanish speaking, but because of that reading test at the state level that we're trying very hard to make not a requirement for bilingual education, but it's there and it's a barrier.
Okay. So what happens to those that are not actual teachers, like the paras and the, like for instance, how do you call them?
The bilingual
Crystals,
homeschool liaisons.
The liaisons.
Right.
Would you require them to be certified as well?
I think that would be something else that we'd have to work through is would the, because we're talking about incentivizing for professional educators, and if we want to open that to homeschool liaisons or other employee groups, we'd have to kind of come up with parameters for that. The other thing about bilingual versus being bilingual versus having a bilingual bicultural license, you may be bilingual but not be a bilingual teacher. And so we would still want that, right, in our schools for staff. If you're an English teacher or somebody else, I mean, we're recruiting specifically for the dual language program, and that requires a bilingual bicultural license. But we're also recruiting for increased linguistic capacity, right? And so those staff that have language proficiency at the level that Rosa Maria was talking about, they would be bilingual, they'd be proficient in Spanish. They may not hold a license, but they could be advanced low on the ACTFL or some other assessment. And so I think in that case, would we offer them the incentive? Or would they have to be in a bilingual position?
So I have a suggestion for you guys, just, to change mindset and just think about, and I totally get it, this is education, and depending on where you're at and what you're teaching and all that, there's different, certifications that you need to have. But let's think about, when we think about incentives for bilinguals, maybe doing something more so like in tiers, like different tiers, because not all staff are going to be in the same requirement level, because you have teachers, you have paras, you have liaisons, you have just regular maintenance ones. You have, you have a variety of ones. So if you think about like different incentives with different tiers and different requirements for those tiers, I think it would be a more inclusive way of think about, incentivizing individuals based on the need and the requirements that they have to meet. So just throwing an idea out there for you guys, if this is a conversation that you're having, there's so many different ways that you can do it to be inclusive and to be equitable too, because I don't want to take away, those teachers that have gone through different trainings and certification classes and all that, which obviously that adds a lot more value to it than someone who just speaks the language, can read, can write, but it's not in a more so professional manner where they have to have like a certification for it, but still are bilingual, and they are serving the purpose, and they're actually probably the ones that are interacting the most with our parents, and maybe our kids as well. They're in. I think that they're just in different segments, different levels. One being educational one, and the other one being like providing a service, providing that customer service to our parents that come in. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but just an idea.
Can I just make one quick suggestion? Can we switch B and C? It seems to me C is a higher priority than B in terms of our topic area.
How's that?
That looks good.
Looks good.
Thanks for the period, Michelle. Okay. So it looks like we have 4 A, B, and C in good order.
Yeah, any more discussion around 4 at all? Or?
I think we have a nice looking document here.
Yeah. Okay, well, then if there's no other discussion around those that preliminary proposal to the board, that brings us to schedule presentation to the Board of Education. So, Tony, did you say that would be May 4th? Or Michelle, do you know if that would be May 4th that we present that?
It is May 4th at 5:15.
Ooh, may the 4th be with us.
Yeah.
So then our board report, which this is a part of it, would have to be submitted by April 28th. Is that correct, Michelle? The Wednesday before?
No, prior to that, because I have to post on the 28th.
So by the 26th? Okay. So we would have to have our board docs report submitted to the Honorable Ms. Shope by the 26th. So we have the recommendations, but we do not have the presentation. Do we need a presentation? Or is this, what does the group think about how we present this then to the board?
Well, I think this would be the core of our presentation. I don't know, we probably want to have, in case there were questions from the board, maybe we'd have something ready to show, if they asked us what were the survey questions that we asked, or what were, what were the other recommendations that we considered, be ready to answer questions. But I would think this would be the core part of it.
I mean, just as you took what we had talked about last time and made it into this document, could you put this into it, create it as a presentation, what kind of format, slides or whatever, you might throw in a picture of a signage when we're talking about that section. I mean, would you be able to just do something simple like that? I don't know if that's simple, but is that what we're talking about, something of that nature?
I think Rosa Maria Larson would love to do something like that. Yes, we could, going back to, but I wonder if, so it'd be a simple slide deck that would have, like we talked about, starting out with the initial recommendations or priorities, or the barriers rather, then going through, like we talked about, the research, the survey interview work that we did, and then it'd go right. So it would be a fairly short presentation, I think. Is that something that the committee would feel comfortable with? Myself and Rosa Maria and maybe any other members interested in putting together over the course of the next couple of days to share with the group for comment and adjustment, and then submit it on the 26th in lieu of having another meeting next week? Or would you like to have another meeting next week?
I think the presentation, if you just shared it, we could make comments.
Okay.
That would be plenty.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we will have something shared to the group no later than 9 a.m. Monday morning. How's that sound?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. And Ms. Shope was giving me a timeout signal. Oh, no, never mind, disregard. So I think we can rough out a draft presentation to share with this group, the Ad Hoc Language Barrier Committee, by 9 o'clock Monday morning, and then we'll have until the end of the week for comment, and then we'll finalize it and put it in board docs the following Monday.
Okay, wonderful. Well, then that brings us to the meeting closing. And if that were the case and we were able to present on May 4th, is there a future meeting date, or would our future meeting date be on the 4th? I'm not sure about that.
The 4th would not be an official meeting because the meeting is the planning and budget meeting. So then
Okay.
it's up to you and your committee if you want to have a meeting following that meeting, like either the next day, which would be your standard meeting time, or if you, whatever you guys decide to do.
I think we should keep our standard meeting time, and maybe we can have discussion of how it went during the board meeting.
Okay, and then we could have reflection and maybe at least close the committee in a more formal way, and then consider if we want if we think there's some other stuff left undone, or, I think that's important to finish in a good way.
So we're meeting on Cinco de Mayo?
Is that then, I think,
May
May?
the 4th be with us.
Yeah.
These are all good signs, right?
Yeah. Okay, so it looks like, so Cinco de Mayo is Wednesday at 5:30? I think so. Let's see. Yep, it looks like that would be at Wednesday at 5, Wednesday, May 5th at 5:30. And the future agenda items, I think, would be, I don't know if anyone, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I might have a conflict with Cinco de Mayo because that's the service providers banquet, and I'm not exactly sure what time that is, but I'm going to be the keynote speaker for that, so I might not be able to make it. So, yeah, I still don't have what time it would be, so I can check back with you guys. But I mean, if you don't mind me not being present, that's fine.
Okay, well, we can maybe just set it tentatively, and then, it seems like when maybe if we need to change it, we can always try to adjust the date or time depending on what you find out.
Maria, I think it's 12 to 1.
I'm sorry?
I think it's 12 to 1.
Oh, if it's 12 to 1, that is perfect then.
Okay.
It's virtual, so it's, yeah.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you, Tulio.
So then the future agenda items, I think, for that meeting would be reflecting, closing the committee, and just kind of seeing how things went. And any other discussion around future agenda items? Okay, then that brings us to the adjournment of the meeting. And so I don't know if we need a second motion to adjourn. Yeah, we do need a motion to adjourn. So can I please have a
So moved.
All right, thank you. And a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, then this meeting is adjourned, and we'll look forward to seeing that presentation. Tony and Rosa Maria, thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Take care. Evelyn, see you tomorrow.
Okay, bye-bye.